It was a sunny afternoon in Maple Grove. Maple Grove was a small, cozy little neighborhood. Everyone who lived there thought they knew everyone else. It was the kind of place where kids rode bikes on the sidewalks, and old people sat on porches waving at cars. The houses were small, with green lawns and flowers in the yards. Birds chirped in the trees, and the air smelled like fresh grass. It felt nice. Peaceful. Like nothing bad could ever happen. But I was about to find out that wasn't true. My name is Jake Carter. I'm just a regular guy. Not tall, not short, not old, not young. Just, me. I have brown hair that sticks up in the morning and a big smile when I'm happy. I moved to Maple Grove a few weeks ago because I wanted a quiet place to live. I didn't come with a big fancy car or a bunch of stuff. I just brought my clothes, some books, and my dog. My dog's name is Rusty. He's the best. Rusty isn't a fancy dog. He doesn't have shiny fur or a special collar with diamonds on it. He's a mutt. That means he's a mix of all kinds of dogs. His fur is scruffy and brown, with some black spots here and there. One of his ears sticks up, and the other flops down. He's got big, round eyes that look at me like I'm his whole world. And to me, he's my best buddy. We do everything together. When I eat breakfast, he sits by my chair waiting for crumbs. When I watch TV, he curls up on the couch next to me. He's not perfect, but he's mine. Rusty likes to have fun. He barks at squirrels when they run up trees in our yard. His bark is loud and goofy, like woof. 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 It makes me laugh every time. Sometimes he chases his tail, spinning around in circles until he gets dizzy and falls over. At night, when the moon is big and bright in the sky, he'll sit by the window and howl. It's not a scary howl, like a wolf in a movie. It's more like he's singing a silly song to the stars. A-woo. A-woo, he goes, and I just shake my head and smile. To me, that's no big deal. Rusty's just being Rusty. But not everyone thought so. See, I'd only been in Maple Grove for a few weeks. 3 weeks, to be exact. That's 21 days. Not a long time, right? I was still unpacking boxes in my little house. It had white walls, a red door, and a tiny porch where I put a chair. I liked sitting there with Rusty, watching the world go by. Kids would ride past on their bikes, shouting and laughing. Neighbors would walk their dogs or water their flowers. Everyone seemed friendly enough. They'd wave at me and say, "Hi, new guy." I'd wave back and say, "Hey there." It felt good to be in a place like that. But then I started to notice something. Not everyone was as nice as they seemed. When I walked Rusty down the street, some people stared at us. Not in a happy way, like when you see a cute puppy. It was more like they were watching us too hard. Their eyes followed us, and their mouths turned down into little frowns. Sometimes I'd hear them whisper to each other as we passed by. "That's the new guy," they'd say, their voices low. Or, "Look at that dog." I didn't get it. What was wrong with us? I'm just a guy. Rusty's just a dog. Why did they care so much? At first, I didn't think about it too much. People stare sometimes. Maybe they were curious because I was new. Maybe they weren't used to seeing a dog like Rusty. He's not like the other dogs in Maple Grove. Most of them are little and fluffy, with bows in their fur. Rusty's big and messy, with dirt on his paws from playing outside. I figured people would get used to us eventually. New guy, new dog, big deal, right? They'd see we weren't trouble and leave us alone. That's what I told myself. But I was wrong. So wrong. Trouble wasn't just coming. It was already here, hiding behind fake smiles and sneaky whispers. And I didn't even know it yet. Let me tell you about my house for a minute. It's not big. It's got 2 bedrooms, one for me and one I use for my books and stuff. There's a small kitchen where I make eggs and toast every morning. The living room has a couch, a TV, and a rug that Rusty loves to nap on. Outside, there's a little yard with a fence. It's not a tall fence, just high enough to keep Rusty from running into the street. I put a water bowl out there for him, and sometimes I toss a ball for him to chase. That yard is his favorite place. He'll dig holes, roll in the grass, and bark at birds flying overhead. It's our little spot, just for us. The first week in Maple Grove was great. I unpacked my boxes, hung some pictures on the walls, and met a few neighbors. There was Mrs. Jenkins next door. She's an old lady with white hair and glasses. She gave me a plate of cookies and said, "Welcome to the neighborhood, Jake." They were chocolate chip, my favorite. Then there was Tim, who lives across the street. He's a big guy with a loud laugh. He shook my hand so hard I thought it'd fall off. "Good to have you here, man," he said. I liked them. They made me feel like I belonged. Rusty liked it too. He'd wag his tail when Mrs. Jenkins waved at him from her porch. He'd run over to Tim's yard to sniff around when Tim was outside. Everyone seemed okay with Rusty back then. Or at least, that's what I thought. I didn't know some people were already mad about him. I didn't know they were watching us every day, waiting for a reason to complain. It started small. One day, I was walking Rusty down the street. We were just minding our own business. The sun was shining, and a cool breeze was blowing through the trees. Rusty stopped to sniff a bush, his tail wagging like crazy. Then I heard a voice behind me. "That dog's too loud," someone muttered. I turned around, but I didn't see who said it. Just a couple of people standing on a porch, looking the other way. I shrugged and kept walking. Maybe I heard wrong, I thought. The next day, it happened again. I was in my yard, tossing Rusty's ball. He barked a few times, happy barks, like woof. This is fun. Then I saw a lady across the street. She had her arms crossed and a frown on her face. "Can't you keep that mutt quiet?" she yelled. I blinked at her. "He's just playing," I said. She huffed and stormed back inside her house. I didn't even know her name, but she was already mad at us. That's when I started to feel it. Eyes on me. All the time. When I took Rusty for walks, people watched from their windows. When we played in the yard, I'd hear whispers from over the fence. "That dog barks too much," they'd say. Or, "Who does that new guy think he is?" It made my stomach feel funny, like when you're nervous before a test. I didn't get it. Rusty wasn't hurting anyone. He was just being a dog. Why did they care so much? I tried to ignore it. Maybe they'd stop. Maybe they'd see Rusty was a good boy and leave us alone. I told myself that over and over. "It's fine, Jake," I'd say. "They'll get over it." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Something felt off. Like when you're playing hide and seek, and you know someone's close, but you can't see them yet. That's how it felt, like something was sneaking up on me, and I didn't even know what it was. Then, one afternoon, it got real. I was sitting on my porch with Rusty. He was chewing on a stick, happy as can be. The sun was warm, and I was drinking a glass of lemonade. Everything was perfect. Until I heard footsteps. Heavy ones. I looked up, and there they were, two guys walking right toward my house. They didn't look friendly. They had mean faces and wore shirts that said HOA security. I'd never seen them before. Who were they? What did they want? They stopped at my gate and stared at me. One of them pointed at Rusty. "That your dog?" he asked. His voice was gruff, like he was mad already. "Yeah," I said. "His name's Rusty." The other guy smirked. "Well, Rusty's a problem," he said. "And we're here to fix it?" My heart started beating fast. A problem? Rusty? What were they talking about? I didn't know it yet, but that moment was the start of everything. Trouble wasn't just brewing anymore. It was here, standing right in front of me. And it was about to knock on my door. Literally. "Hey, quick question for you, what would you do if someone tried to mess with your pet?" Stick around, because you'll love how this turns out. Things are about to get crazy, and I can't wait to tell you what happened next. Trust me, you won't believe it. So there I was, Jake Carter, sitting on my little porch in Maple Grove. The sun was shining bright, making the red door of my house look extra red. My glass of lemonade was cold in my hand, and the ice cubes clinked together when I took a sip. Rusty, my scruffy mutt, was next to me, chewing on a stick he'd found in the yard. His tail wagged back and forth, thumping against the porch floor. Thump, thump, thump. It was a happy sound. To me, it was the best sound in the world. I looked out at the street. Maple Grove was so quiet that day. No kids on bikes, no cars driving by. Just the birds singing in the trees and a soft breeze rustling the leaves. My house was at the end of a short road, with a big oak tree in the front yard. That tree was huge, its branches stretched out like arms, shading half the lawn. I liked it. It made my house feel cozy, like it was tucked away from everything. Me and Rusty could just relax there, away from the world. But then I heard those footsteps. Heavy, loud footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch on the gravel path that led to my gate. I looked up, and my heart did a little jump. Two guys were walking straight toward me. They didn't look like neighbors. They didn't look friendly. They were big, taller than me, with wide shoulders and grumpy faces. One had short black hair and a nose that looked like it'd been squashed. The other had a scruffy beard and eyes that stared too hard. They wore matching shirts, dark blue polos with HOA security written on them in yellow letters. I squinted at the words. HOA. What was that? I'd never heard of it before. They stopped right at my gate. It's a little wooden gate, painted white, with a latch that squeaks when you open it. Rusty stopped chewing his stick and lifted his head. His floppy ear twitched, and he let out a low woof. Not a mean bark, just a curious one. I put my lemonade down on the porch railing and stood up. Hey, I said, trying to sound nice. Can I help you? The guy with the squashed nose pointed at Rusty. That your dog? He asked. His voice was rough, like he smoked too many cigarettes. I nodded. Yeah, that's Rusty. He's my buddy. The other guy, the one with the beard, smirked. It wasn't a nice smirk. It was the kind that makes you feel small. Well, Rusty's a problem, he said. And we're here to fix it? I blinked. A problem? Rusty. My dog wasn't a problem. He was just sitting there, wagging his tail, with a stick in his mouth. What do you mean? I asked. My voice came out quieter than I wanted. The squashed-nosed guy crossed his arms. He barks too much, he said. People don't like it? The beard guy nodded. Yeah. We've had complaints. Lots of complaints. Complaints. I didn't get it. Who was complaining? I'd only been in Maple Grove for 3 weeks. Rusty barks sometimes, sure, but not all the time. He barked at squirrels and birds, maybe at the mailman once or twice. That's what dogs do. I looked at Rusty. He tilted his head at me, like he was confused too. His big brown eyes said, "What's going on, Jake?" I wished I could tell him. I don't think he's that loud, I said, scratching the back of my neck. He's just a dog. The beard guy stepped closer to the gate. It creaked under his hand as he leaned on it. Doesn't matter, he said. We're with the HOA. We make the rules around here. And we say that dogs gotta stop. I frowned. HOA? What's that? I asked. The squashed-nosed guy rolled his eyes, like I was dumb for not knowing. Homeowners Association, he said. We keep this place nice. No loud dogs allowed. I stared at them. A homeowners association? That sounded fancy, like something for big houses with pools and gates. My house was tiny. Maple Grove was just a regular neighborhood. Did we even have an HOA? I wasn't sure. Wait, I said. I didn't sign up for anything like that. I just moved here. The beard guy laughed a short, mean laugh. Doesn't matter, he said. You live here, you follow our rules. And your dog's breaking them. I felt my face get hot. This didn't make sense. Rusty wasn't breaking anything. He was just being himself. I looked at the guys again. Their shirts looked weird. The yellow letters were crooked, like someone sewed them on by hand. And their pants didn't match. One had jeans, the other had old cargo shorts. They didn't look like security people. They looked like, I don't know, regular guys pretending to be important. But they acted like they owned the whole street. Okay, I said slowly. But he's not hurting anyone. He's a good dog. The squashed-nosed guy shook his head. Doesn't matter, he said again. We'll be back. You better keep him quiet, or else. Then they turned and walked away, their heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel again. I watched them go, my heart beating fast. Or else. What did that mean? Rusty whined and nudged my leg with his nose. I bent down and scratched his ears. It's okay, boy, I said. They're just grumpy. But I wasn't so sure. Those guys scared me a little. They didn't seem nice. They didn't seem like they were joking. And that or else stuck in my head like a splinter. After they left, I sat back down on the porch. My lemonade wasn't cold anymore, the ice had melted. I took a sip anyway, but it didn't taste as good. The sun was still shining, the birds were still singing, but everything felt different. Like the air had gotten heavier. I looked at Rusty. He was back to chewing his stick, happy again. I wished I could be like him, not worrying about anything. But I couldn't stop thinking about those guys. Who were they, really? Where did they come from? I hadn't seen them before. Mrs. Jenkins never mentioned an HOA. Tim didn't either. When I signed the papers to buy my house, nobody said anything about rules or security people. Was I supposed to get a letter or something? I didn't know. All I knew was that those guys didn't like Rusty. And that made me mad. I decided to talk to someone. Maybe Mrs. Jenkins knew something. She'd lived in Maple Grove forever, her hair was white, and she walked with a cane. If anyone knew about an HOA, it'd be her. So I grabbed Rusty's leash. Come on, boy, I said. Let's go visit the neighbor. He wagged his tail and jumped up, ready for an adventure. We walked across the yard to Mrs. Jenkins' house. Her place was yellow, with flowers all around the porch. Daisies and roses and little purple ones I didn't know the name of. She was outside, sitting in a rocking chair, sipping tea. Hello, Jake, she called when she saw me. Her voice was soft and crackly, like an old radio. Hi, Mrs. Jenkins, I said, waving. Rusty wagged his tail so hard his whole body wiggled. I tied Rusty's leash to her porch railing so he wouldn't run off. He sat down and started sniffing the flowers. What brings you over? Mrs. Jenkins asked, smiling. She had a nice smile, full of wrinkles. I sat on the porch steps and took a deep breath. I just had some guys come by my house, I said. They said they're with the HOA. Do we have an HOA here? Mrs. Jenkins stopped rocking. Her smile went away, and her eyes got narrow. HOA, she said. What's that? I shrugged. They said it's a homeowners association. They told me Rusty barks too much and I have to keep him quiet. She looked at Rusty, then back at me. That's nonsense, she said. I've lived here 40 years. There's no HOA in Maple Grove. My stomach flipped. No HOA? Then who were those guys? They had shirts that said HOA security, I told her. They acted like they're in charge. Mrs. Jenkins frowned. She said. That's strange. I've never heard of security people here. We're just a little neighborhood. Nobody's in charge but us. I nodded, but my head was spinning. If there was no HOA, why were those guys at my house? Were they lying? Pretending? I didn't know what to think. Thanks, Mrs. Jenkins, I said. I just wanted to check. She patted my hand. You be careful, Jake, she said. And don't let anyone bother that sweet dog of yours. I smiled. I won't. As I walked back home with Rusty, the sun was starting to set. The sky turned orange and pink, and long shadows stretched across the street. Everything looked pretty, but I didn't feel calm. Those guys, whoever they were up to something. And they didn't like Rusty. That meant they didn't like me either. When we got home, I locked the door. I don't usually lock it during the day, but I did this time. Rusty curled up on his rug in the living room, and I sat on the couch, staring at the TV even though it wasn't on. My mind wouldn't stop. Who were they? What did they want? And what did or else mean? That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about those footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. And those mean faces. Every time Rusty moved in his sleep, I jumped a little. I didn't know it yet, but that visit was just the start. Trouble wasn't coming anymore, it was here. And it was about to get a whole lot bigger. It all started with these two guys. Let's call them Bob and Larry. They weren't nice guys. Not even a little bit. They walked around Maple Grove like they were the bosses of everything. Their heads were up high, and their steps were loud, like they wanted everyone to notice them. They wore these cheap polo shirts, dark blue ones with HOA security stitched on the front in yellow letters. The stitching was messy, like someone made it with a shaky hand. I didn't know what HOA meant at first. I'd never heard of it in Maple Grove. Was it a club? A team? I had no clue. But Bob and Larry acted like it made them super important. Maple Grove was my new home. It's a small neighborhood with little houses, green lawns, and big trees. I'm Jake Carter, just a regular guy with a scruffy dog named Rusty. Rusty's my best friend. He's got messy brown fur, one floppy ear, and a tail that wags all the time. He barks at squirrels and howls at the moon sometimes, but he's a good dog. I moved here 3 weeks ago, and everything was fine until Bob and Larry showed up. The first time I saw them, I was in my yard. It's a little yard with a short white fence. Rusty was running around, chasing a ball I'd thrown. The sun was warm, and I was smiling because Rusty looked so happy. His tongue was out, and his paws kicked up dirt as he ran. Then I heard footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch on the gravel path by my house. I looked up, and there they were, Bob and Larry, standing at my gate. Bob was the taller one. He had short black hair and a nose that looked like it got squashed in a fight. His eyes were small and mean, like a snake's. Larry was shorter, with a scruffy beard and a big belly that stretched his shirt. They both stared at Rusty, squinting like he'd done something bad. "That dog's a nuisance," Bob said, jabbing a finger at Rusty. His voice was loud and rough. Rusty stopped running and looked at him, wagging his tail. He didn't know Bob was mad. He thought everyone liked him. I stood up from the grass. "What?" I said. "He's not a nuisance. He's just playing." Bob didn't even look at me. He kept staring at Rusty, his finger still pointing. "He barks too much," he said. "People don't like it." I blinked. People? What people? I hadn't heard anyone complain. My neighbors, like Mrs. Jenkins and Tim, seemed fine with Rusty. "I don't think so," I said. "He's a good dog." That's when Larry stepped closer. He leaned over the gate, and I could smell his breath. It was gross, like old coffee left out too long. "Keep him quiet," he said, "or we'll handle it." His voice was low, almost a growl. My stomach twisted up, like when you're scared but don't want to show it. Handle it? What did that mean? Were they going to take Rusty? Hurt him? I didn't like how they sounded. They weren't joking. They meant it. I tried to laugh, just to make it less scary. "He's just a dog, man," I said. "Relax." I hoped they'd laugh too and walk away. But they didn't. Bob's squashed nose wrinkled, like he smelled something bad. Larry's eyes got narrower. "You don't want animal control showing up, newbie," Larry said. He called me newbie like it was a bad word. My laugh stopped fast. Animal control? That's the people who take dogs away. My heart started beating hard. They were serious. These guys, these fake cops, were out to get me. Or worse, Rusty. I looked at Rusty. He was sitting by my feet now, wagging his tail, clueless about all this. His big brown eyes looked up at me, happy and trusting. I wasn't about to let anything happen to him. No way. "Okay," I said, trying to sound calm. "I'll keep him quiet." Bob smirked, like he'd won something. "Better do it," he said. Then they turned and walked off, their shoes crunching on the gravel again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I watched until they were gone, disappearing around the corner. When they left, I sat down on the grass. Rusty climbed into my lap and licked my face. "You're okay, boy," I said, petting him. But I didn't feel okay. My hands were shaky, and my stomach still felt funny. Who were those guys? Why did they care about Rusty? And what was this HOA thing? I didn't know, but I didn't like it. Not one bit. The next day, they came back. I was on my porch, drinking water. Rusty was chewing a stick, making little crunching sounds. It was a quiet morning. Birds were singing, and the sky was blue. Then I saw them, Bob and Larry, walking up the path again. My heart sank. Not again, I thought. They stopped at the gate, same as before. Hey, Bob said. That dog barked last night. I frowned. He howled at the moon a little, I said. It's not a big deal. Larry crossed his arms. It's a big deal to us, he said. We got rules. No loud dogs. I stood up. What rules? I didn't sign up for any rules. Bob laughed a short, mean laugh. You live here, you follow them, he said. That's how it works. I didn't know what to say. They acted so sure, like they owned Maple Grove. But something felt wrong. Their shirts looked cheap. The yellow letters were peeling a little at the edges. And they didn't have badges or anything official. They just had those shirts and bad attitudes. Look, I said, he's not hurting anyone. He's my dog. Leave us alone. Larry leaned in again. That coffee smell hit me, and I stepped back. We'll leave you alone when that mutt shuts up, he said. Or we'll make him shut up. My chest got tight. Make him shut up? That sounded bad. Really bad. I clenched my fists, but I didn't say anything. They stared at me for a second, then walked off. I watched them go, my heart pounding. After that, things got worse. They didn't just come once or twice. They kept showing up. Every few days, I'd see them. Sometimes they'd knock on my door. Bang, bang, bang loud and hard. Quiet that dog. Bob would yell. Other times, they'd just stand by the gate, staring. Rusty would bark at them, and they'd glare like he'd insulted them. See? Larry would say. He's a problem. I started keeping Rusty inside more. I didn't want them to see him. But that made him sad. He'd sit by the window, looking out at the yard, whining. I'm sorry, boy, I'd say. It's just for now. I hated it. Rusty loved being outside, running around, barking at birds. Now he was stuck, and it was because of Bob and Larry. One day, I saw them talking to a neighbor. It was the lady across the street, the one who yelled at me about Rusty before. She had her arms crossed, nodding at whatever Bob was saying. Were they teaming up? Did she call them? I didn't know her name, but now I didn't trust her. Maybe she was part of this HOA thing. Maybe she hated Rusty too. I started asking around. I went to Mrs. Jenkins' house again. She was watering her flowers, same as always. Mrs. Jenkins, I said, do you know those guys in the blue shirts? They keep bothering me about Rusty. She put down her watering can and frowned. Blue shirts, she said. No, I don't know them. What do they want? I told her everything, how they called themselves HOA security, how they threatened animal control. Her eyes got big. That's not right, she said. We don't have an HOA here. Never did. That made my stomach twist even more. No HOA? Then who were Bob and Larry? Why were they acting like this? They're scaring me, I admitted. Mrs. Jenkins patted my arm. Don't let them bully you, Jake, she said. You and Rusty are good folks. I smiled, but inside, I was worried. If they weren't real, what were they doing? I asked Tim too. He's the big guy across the street with the loud laugh. Hey, Tim, I said one day while he was mowing his lawn. You ever hear of an HOA here? He turned off the mower and wiped his forehead. HOA? Nope, he said. What's going on? I told him about Bob and Larry. His laugh went away. That's weird, man, he said. Never seen those guys. Be careful. Nobody knew them. Nobody knew about an HOA. But Bob and Larry kept coming. One night, I heard a noise outside. It was late, and the moon was full. Rusty growled low in his throat. I peeked out the window and saw them, Bob and Larry, standing by my fence. They had a flashlight, shining it into my yard. My heart raced. What were they doing? Rusty barked once, and they looked up at the house. I ducked down, hoping they didn't see me. The next morning, I found a note on my door. It was written in messy handwriting. Quiet the dog or else, it said. No name, just that. I stared at it, my hands shaking. Or else. There it was again. They weren't stopping. They were getting bolder. And I was getting scared. I didn't know what to do. Keep Rusty quiet? How? He's a dog, he barks sometimes. Move away. I just got here. Fight back. I didn't even know who they really were. All I knew was that they hated Rusty. And because of that, they hated me too. My little life in Maple Grove was turning upside down, all because of these fake cops. I hugged Rusty tight that day. I won't let them get you, I whispered. He licked my face, trusting me. But inside, I was a mess. They weren't joking. They were out to get us. And I had to figure out how to stop them before it was too late. Hey, quick question for you, what would you do if someone tried to mess with your pet? Stick around, because you'll love how this turns out. Things are gonna get wild, and I promise you won't see what's coming next. Days went by after Bob and Larry first showed up at my house. Things didn't get better, they got weirder. A lot weirder. My name's Jake Carter, and I live in Maple Grove with my dog, Rusty. He's a scruffy mutt with brown fur and a wagging tail. I thought moving here would be fun and quiet, but those two guys Bob and Larry were making it anything but quiet. They kept coming back, and every time they did, my stomach felt like it was full of jumping frogs. Bob and Larry weren't nice. Bob was tall with a squashed nose and mean eyes. Larry was shorter with a scruffy beard and breath that smelled like old coffee. They wore blue shirts that said HOA security in yellow letters, but I was starting to think that didn't mean anything. They acted like they owned Maple Grove, walking around with big steps and loud voices. And they didn't like Rusty. Not one bit. At first, it was just them showing up and yelling about Rusty barking. Keep him quiet, they'd say, pointing at him like he was a bad guy. Rusty didn't understand, he'd just wag his tail and look at me with his big brown eyes. But after a while, they stopped just talking. They started doing creepy stuff. They'd come to my yard when I wasn't looking, taking pictures of Rusty with their phones. Click, 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 I'd hear it through the window. Then they'd scribble notes on little pads of paper, like they were building a case against him. One day, I was inside making a sandwich. Peanut butter and jelly, my favorite. Rusty was in the yard, sniffing around by the fence. I looked out the kitchen window and saw them, Bob and Larry, standing by my gate again. Bob had his phone up, snapping pictures of Rusty. Larry was writing something, his pencil scratching fast. I dropped my sandwich on the counter and ran to the door. Hey! I yelled, stepping outside. What are you doing? Bob didn't even look at me. He kept taking pictures. Click, click. Larry glanced up and smirked. Just keeping track, he said. That dog's a problem. I felt my face get hot. He's not a problem, I said. He's my dog. Stop it. Bob finally put his phone down and stared at me. We'll stop when he's gone, he said. Then they walked away, leaving me standing there with my heart thumping loud. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Bob said. When he's gone. Gone where? Were they going to take Rusty? Hurt him? I looked at Rusty, sleeping on his rug by my bed. He was snoring, his little paws twitching like he was dreaming about chasing squirrels. I didn't want him to be gone. He was my best friend. I had to figure out what was going on. The next morning, I heard something that made everything worse. I was outside getting the mail. The mailbox is by the street, a little red box with my name on it. Rusty was with me, sniffing the grass. Then I saw Bob across the road, talking on his phone. He didn't see me, he was turned the other way. I stayed quiet and listened. Yeah, he muttered, his voice low. We'll get this mud out of here soon. My blood went cold, like ice was running through me. They weren't just bluffing. They were serious. Really serious. I grabbed Rusty's leash and pulled him back to the house fast. Inside, I locked the door and sat on the couch. My hands were shaking. Out of here soon, I whispered to myself. That meant they had a plan. A real plan to get rid of Rusty. But why? He was just a dog. He barked sometimes, sure, but he wasn't hurting anyone. What did they want? That's when I decided I wasn't going to just sit there. Bob and Larry thought I was clueless, like I didn't know anything. But here's the thing, I wasn't as dumb as they thought. See, I'd been watching them too. Not just standing there letting them scare me. I'd been paying attention, looking for clues. And I was starting to notice stuff that didn't add up. First, there were their shirts. Those HOA security badges on them. They didn't look real. The yellow letters were crooked and peeling, like something you'd make with a cheap printer at home. Real security people have shiny badges, right? Like police officers or guards at the mall. Bob and Larry's shirts looked like they got them from a junk store. And their car, it was parked down the street sometimes. It wasn't a fancy security car with lights or logos. It was just an old, beat-up sedan. Gray, with a dent in the side and a sticker peeling off the back. No official plates, nothing that said HOA. Just a regular car. That was weird. I started thinking. If they were really from an HOA, whatever that was, wouldn't they have better stuff? A real uniform? A car with their name on it? I didn't know much about HOAs, but I knew security people didn't look like that. Something wasn't right. My head was spinning with questions. Who were they? Why were they pretending? What did they want with Rusty? I decided to find out more. But I had to be sneaky. Bob and Larry couldn't know I was onto them. So I started asking around quietly, of course. I didn't want them to hear me. First, I went to Mrs. Jenkins. She's my neighbor, an old lady with white hair and a nice smile. She lives in a yellow house next door, with flowers all around her porch. I knocked on her door one afternoon. Knock, knock, knock. She opened it, holding a cup of tea. "Hi, Jake," she said. "What's up?" "Hey, Mrs. Jenkins," I said, keeping my voice low. "Do you know those guys, Bob and Larry? The ones in the blue shirts?" She tilted her head. "Bob and Larry," she said. "Who are they?" I told her about them, how they kept coming to my house, saying Rusty was too loud. Her smile went away. "Oh, those two," she said. "They've been bossing people around for months. Telling folks what to do. I don't like them." I blinked. "Months?" I said. "They've been here that long?" She nodded. "Yep. Started last summer, I think. They show up, act big, then leave." I frowned. Months. That didn't add up. I'd only been in Maple Grove for 3 weeks. If they'd been here for months, why were they just now bothering me? And if they were security, why didn't everyone know them? "Do they work for an HOA?" I asked. Mrs. Jenkins laughed. "HOA? No way," she said. "We don't have one here. Never did." My heart skipped. No HOA? Then why were they wearing those shirts? I thanked Mrs. Jenkins and walked home, my head full of thoughts. If there was no HOA, Bob and Larry were lying. But why? What were they up to? I had to talk to more people. So I went to Tim next. He's the big guy across the street with a loud laugh. He was outside washing his car, a shiny blue truck. "Hey, Tim," I called. He waved. "Hey, Jake. What's up, man?" I walked over, Rusty trotting beside me. "You know those guys, Bob and Larry?" I asked. "They say they're HOA security." Tim stopped scrubbing and looked at me. "HOA security," he said. "Never heard of them. Or an HOA. What do they want?" I told him about Rusty, the pictures, the threats. His face got serious. "That's not cool," he said. "They've been around for months, huh? Bossing people around. I thought they were just weirdos." Months again. Everyone said the same thing. Bob and Larry had been in Maple Grove for months, acting like they were in charge. But nobody knew what an HOA was. Nobody thought they were real. I started feeling a little brave. If they weren't real, maybe I could stop them. But I needed more clues. One day, I saw their car again. That beat-up sedan was parked by the big white house down the street. I hid behind my oak tree and watched. Bob got out, holding a clipboard. Larry stayed in the car, talking on his phone. I couldn't hear them, but I saw Bob write something, then look at my house. My stomach flipped. They were still after Rusty. I ducked down so they wouldn't see me. That night, I looked out my window. It was dark, and the moon was big. Rusty was asleep, But I couldn't rest. I kept thinking about that car, those shirts, the notes. Then I saw something alight moving in my yard. A flashlight. I peeked closer and saw Bob, creeping around by my fence. He was alone this time, shining the light on Rusty's water bowl. My heart raced. What was he doing? I wanted to yell, but I stayed quiet. He didn't know I was watching. The next day, I found footprints in the dirt by the fence. Big ones, like Bob's boots. And a candy wrapper, red and shiny, dropped in the grass. I picked it up and stared at it. Bob ate candy? It was a silly clue, but it proved he'd been there. He was sneaking around my house at night. That wasn't security stuff. That was creepy. I started writing things down. Their car gray, dented, peeling sticker. Their shirts cheap, fake looking. The pictures, the notes, the flashlight. Every little thing I saw. I wasn't clueless anymore. I was figuring it out. Bob and Larry weren't who they said they were. They were pretending. But why? What did they want with Rusty? Days turned into weeks, and they didn't stop. They'd show up, glare at Rusty, take more pictures. I'd hear them mutter stuff like, "He's still here," or "not for long." My blood stayed cold all the time now. They were serious about getting him out of here. But I was too serious about keeping him safe. What do you think was really going on? Any guesses? Keep watching, because the truth is about to explode. I was getting closer to it, one clue at a time. Bob and Larry didn't know it, but I was watching. And soon, I'd know everything. So there I was, Jake Carter, sitting in my little house in Maple Grove. My dog Rusty was curled up on his rug, snoring away like nothing was wrong. But I knew better. Those two guys, Bob and Larry, were out there, sneaking around, trying to get rid of him. I'd already found their footprints in my yard and that red candy wrapper Bob dropped. I was starting to figure things out, but I needed more. I wasn't going to let them win. No way. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I wasn't just going to sit there anymore, waiting for them to come back. I was going to be sneaky, just like they were. I made breakfast, eggs and toast, same as always. Rusty sat by my feet, waiting for crumbs. I dropped a little piece of toast on purpose, and he gobbled it up, wagging his tail. "You're my buddy," I told him, scratching his ears. "We're in this together." He barked once, like he agreed. After breakfast, I grabbed a notebook. It was a small one with a blue cover, something I used to write grocery lists in. Now it was my clue book. I wrote down everything I knew about Bob and Larry. Their car gray, dented, with a peeling sticker. Their shirts blue with HOA security in crooked yellow letters. The pictures they took of Rusty. The notes they scribbled. The flashlight in my yard. And now, the candy wrapper. Every little thing went in that book. I wasn't clueless anymore. I was a detective. I decided to watch them closer. That day, I took Rusty for a walk, but it wasn't a normal walk. I kept my eyes open, looking for that beat-up sedan. We went down the street, past Mrs. Jenkins' yellow house with her flowers. She waved from her porch. "Hi, Jake," she called. "Hi," I said back, but I didn't stop to chat. I had a job to do. Rusty sniffed the grass, happy as ever, while I scanned every corner. Then I saw it, the car. It was parked by the big white house again, the one with the red roof. I slowed down and pretended to tie my shoe. Rusty sat next to me, wagging his tail. I peeked over at the car. The windows were down, and I could see Larry inside, eating something. A sandwich, maybe. Bob wasn't there, he must have been walking around somewhere. I stayed low, watching. Larry took a bite, then tossed a wrapper out the window. Another red candy wrapper, just like the one in my yard. My heart jumped. That was proof it was Bob sneaking around last night, and Larry was in on it too. I pulled Rusty behind a bush so Larry wouldn't see us. "SHH, I whispered. He tilted his head, confused, but stayed quiet. I watched Larry finish his sandwich, then pick up his phone. He started talking, but I was too far to hear. His mouth moved fast, and he looked mad. Was he talking about Rusty? About me? I couldn't tell, but it didn't feel good. After a minute, he hung up and leaned back in the seat, waiting. That's when Bob came back. He walked up to the car from the other side of the street, carrying that clipboard again. He looked sweaty, like he'd been running around. Anything? Larry asked, loud enough for me to hear this time. Bob shook his head. Not yet, he said. But we're close. Close to what? My stomach twisted. Were they close to getting Rusty? I hugged my knees, staying hidden. They didn't know I was there, listening. Bob got in the car, and they drove off, the engine making a loud rumble. I waited until they were gone, then stood up. Come on, Rusty, I said. Let's go home. We walked back fast, my head spinning. We're close, Bob had said. That meant their plan was almost ready. I had to be faster. I had to find out more before they did whatever they were going to do. Back at home, I sat on the couch with my clue book. Rusty jumped up next to me and put his head in my lap. I pet him while I thought. The candy wrapper, the car, the fake shirts, all those things told me Bob and Larry weren't real security. But what were they? Why did they care about Rusty so much? I needed another clue, something big. That afternoon, I went outside to check the mail. The mailbox was empty, but as I turned to go back, I saw something in the grass by the fence. A piece of paper, crumpled up like trash. I picked it up and smoothed it out. It was a note, written in messy handwriting. Meet at 8. Bring the stuff, it said. No names, no address, just that. My heart beat fast. Was this theirs? Did they drop it? I looked around, but nobody was there. The street was quiet, just birds chirping and a breeze blowing. I stuffed the note in my pocket and ran inside. In my clue book, I wrote, note, meet at 8. Bring the stuff. It didn't tell me much, but it was something. Maybe they were meeting someone tonight. Maybe that was part of their plan. I didn't know what the stuff was, but it sounded sneaky. That night, I stayed up late. It was dark outside, and the clock said 7:30. If they were meeting at 8, maybe I could see something. I put on a black hoodie so I'd blend into the shadows. Stay here, Rusty, I said. He whined, but I gave him a treat to keep him happy. Then I slipped out the back door and hid by the oak tree in my yard. It was big, with branches that hid me good. At 8 o'clock, I heard that rumble, their car. It pulled up down the street, near the White House again. I peeked out and saw Bob and Larry get out. They had a bag with them, a black one that looked heavy. Another car pulled up, a red one I didn't know. A guy got out, skinny with a cap pulled low over his face. I couldn't see him good, but he shook Bob's hand. Got it? The skinny guy asked. Bob nodded and opened the bag. I couldn't see inside, but the skinny guy smiled. Good, he said. This'll work. My heart was pounding so loud I thought they'd hear it. What was in the bag? Was it for Rusty? They talked low, and I couldn't catch everything. But I heard one word clear: dog. The skinny guy said, the dog's next. Bob laughed. Yeah, soon, he said. Then they shook hands again, and the skinny guy drove off. Bob and Larry got back in their car and left too. I ran inside, my legs shaking. The dog's next. That was Rusty. They were planning something for him, something bad. The bag, the meeting, it was all part of it. I hugged Rusty tight when I got in. I won't let them get you, I said. He licked my face, not knowing how scared I was. I wrote it all in my clue book: the car, the bag, the skinny guy, the dog's next. Every day, I was finding more. Bob and Larry weren't HOA. They were fakes, working with someone else. And Rusty was their target. But why? What did they want him gone for? I didn't know yet, but I was close. Closer than they thought. The next day, I saw their car again. This time, they stopped by my house. Bob got out and stuck a note on my door. I waited till they left, then grabbed it. Last chance, it said. Quiet the dog, or we will. My hands shook. Last chance? They were running out of time, or I was. But I wasn't giving up. I was watching, learning, waiting. The truth was coming, and it was going to be big. What do you think was really going on? Any guesses? Keep watching, because the truth is about to explode. I had more clues now, and I wasn't stopping. Bob and Larry were in trouble, they just didn't know it yet. Things had been getting crazy in Maple Grove. My name's Jake Carter, and I'm just a regular guy with a scruffy dog named Rusty. He's my best buddy, with messy brown fur and a tail that wags like crazy. We moved to this little neighborhood a few weeks ago, and at first, it was nice. Small houses, green yards, friendly people. But then Bob and Larry showed up. They were two mean guys who said they were HOA security, whatever that was. They kept bothering me about Rusty, saying he barked too much. They took pictures, left notes, even sneaked around my yard at night. I found out they weren't real security, they were fakes. And they wanted Rusty gone. I'd been watching them, writing clues in my notebook. Their beat-up car, their cheap shirts, the candy wrapper Bob dropped, it all told me they were lying. I asked neighbors like Mrs. Jenkins and Tim, and nobody knew about an HOA. Bob and Larry had been bossing people around for months, acting big, but they weren't legit. I even saw them meet a skinny guy with a bag, talking about the dog being next. My dog. Rusty. I knew they had a plan, and I was scared. But I wasn't going to let them win. No way. One evening, everything exploded. I was in my house, sitting on the couch with Rusty. It was getting dark outside, and the moon was peeking through the window. Rusty was chewing on a toy, a little rubber bone that squeaked when he bit it. Squeak, squeak, squeak. I was trying to relax, but my stomach felt jumpy. I kept thinking about Bob and Larry's last note, last chance. Quiet the dog, or we will. What did that mean? What were they going to do? Then I heard it, a loud knock on my door. Bang, bang, bang. It was so hard the whole house shook a little. Rusty dropped his toy and barked, woof. Woof. I stood up fast, my heart pounding like a drum. Who was it? I walked to the door, my hands sweaty, and peeked through the little window. There they were, Bob and Larry, standing on my porch. They were grinning, big wide grins like they just won a prize. Bob's squashed nose looked extra wrinkly, and Larry's beard was messy as ever. Their blue HOA security shirts glowed under my porch light. But they weren't alone. Behind them stood a guy in a brown uniform. He had a badge that said Animal Control on it. My heart sank all the way to my feet. Animal Control? That's the people who take dogs away. The guy looked annoyed, like he didn't want to be there. His arms were crossed, and his eyebrows were scrunched up. Bob turned to him and said, "This is the place. That dog's a problem." Larry nodded. "Yeah, a big problem." I opened the door slow, trying to stay calm. Rusty barked again from the living room, totally clueless about what was happening. Woof. Woof, he went, his tail wagging. He thought someone fun was here. I wished he was right. The animal control guy stepped forward. "Hi," he said, his voice flat. "We got complaints about your dog. He's gotta come with me." My mouth went dry. Come with him? No way. Rusty wasn't going anywhere. "Wait," I said, my voice shaky. "Complaints? From who?" Bob jumped in fast. "From us," he said, puffing out his chest. "We're HOA security. That dog barks all the time. People hate it." Larry nodded again. "Yeah, he's a nuisance. Gotta go." They were still grinning, like this was the best day ever. I looked at the animal control guy. He didn't look happy. He kept glancing at Bob and Larry, then back at me. His eyes were squinting, like he wasn't sure about something. That's when I noticed it. The animal control guy didn't seem comfortable. He shifted his feet, like he wanted to leave. He kept looking at Bob and Larry funny, not like they were his friends. Maybe he didn't trust them either. My brain started buzzing. This was my chance. I'd been collecting clues, figuring things out. I wasn't going to let them take Rusty without a fight. I took a deep breath and stood taller. "Hold up," I said, louder this time. "Can I see some proof of this HOA you're with?" Bob's face turned red, like a tomato. His grin went away fast. "We don't need to show you anything," he snapped. He stepped closer, pointing a finger at me. "You just do what we say." Larry crossed his arms and glared. Yeah, newbie. Listen up. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was mad. They'd been bullying me for weeks, sneaking around, lying. And now they were here with this guy, trying to take Rusty. Not today. That's when I pulled out my phone. I'd been smart. I turned on the video recorder before I opened the door. It was in my pocket, catching everything. Funny, I said, holding it up so they could see. Because I called the city yesterday. Guess what? There's no HOA in Maple Grove. Never has been. Bob's eyes got wide. Larry's mouth dropped open. The animal control guy turned to them fast. What? He said. You told me this was legit. Bob started stammering, tripping over his words. We're just helping the neighborhood, he said. His voice was high and squeaky now, not mean anymore. Larry nodded fast. Yeah, helping. That's all. But I wasn't done. I dug deeper than they knew. All those clues in my notebook, they added up. Helping. I said. No, you've been scamming people. Pretending to be security. Making up rules that don't exist. Even taking money from folks' fake fines. The animal control guy's jaw dropped. Scamming, he said. He looked at Bob and Larry like they were bugs. You said you were HOA. You said there were complaints. Bob waved his hands. We just wanted things nice, he said. Larry nodded again. Yeah, nice and quiet. But I shook my head. No, I said. I talked to neighbors. Mrs. Jenkins, Tim, everybody. Nobody knows in HOA. You've been lying for months. I saw you sneaking in my yard, taking pictures. I heard you on the phone get this mud out of here. And I saw you with that skinny guy, planning something. Bob's face went from red to white. Larry looked like he wanted to run. The animal control guy grabbed his radio from his belt. This is Officer Dan, he said into it. We've got a problem here. 2 guys impersonating authority. Need backup. My heart jumped. This was it. They were caught. Bob yelled, no, wait, and Larry said, we didn't mean it. But Officer Dan held up a hand. Save it, he said. You're in trouble. I kept my phone recording. Rusty barked again, woof. Woof. I turned and saw him by the door, wagging his tail. He didn't know what was happening, but he was happy to see me. I smiled at him. You're safe, boy, I said. Officer Dan looked at me. You got proof, he asked. I nodded. Yep. Pictures of their car. It's not official. Notes they left. Even a candy wrapper Bob dropped in my yard. Bob groaned. A wrapper, he said. That's nothing. But I grinned. It's something to me. Officer Dan shook his head at Bob and Larry. You 2 are done, he said. I thought this was a real call. You lied to me. He turned to me. Sorry about this, kid. Your dog's not going anywhere. I let out a big breath I didn't know I was holding. Thanks, I said. Rusty ran out and licked my hand. I pet him, feeling lighter than ever. Just then, a police car pulled up. Lights flashed red and blue, lighting up the street. 2 officers got out, big guys with shiny badges. What's going on? One asked. Officer Dan pointed at Bob and Larry. These 2 faked an HOA, he said. Tricked me into coming here. This guy's got evidence. He nodded at me. I held up my phone. It's all here, I said. Video, too. The police officers looked at Bob and Larry. Hands where we can see 'em, one said. Bob's shoulders slumped. Larry's eyes got wet, like he might cry. We just wanted control, Bob mumbled. Make people listen. The officer snorted. Yeah, well, you picked the wrong guy to mess with. They put handcuffs on Bob and Larry, click, click, and led them to the car. Officer Dan stayed with me. Good job, he said. You're smart, kid. I shrugged. I just wanted to keep Rusty safe. He smiled. You did. He's lucky to have you. Rusty barked, woof, like he agreed. The police car drove off with Bob and Larry in the back. Their grins were gone now. They looked small and silly in those fake shirts. I stood on my porch, watching them go. My heart was still beating fast, but it was a good fast now. I'd won. Rusty was safe. The big reveal was over. Bob and Larry weren't security. They were liars, scammers, trying to trick everyone. And I stopped them. Me, Jake Carter, just a regular guy with a dog. The big showdown was over. My name's Jake Carter, and I'm just a regular guy living in Maple Grove with my dog, Rusty. He's a scruffy mutt with brown fur and a tail that wags all the time. For weeks, two mean guys Bob and Larry had been bothering us. They wore fake HOA security shirts and kept saying Rusty barked too much. They even tried to get animal control to take him away. But I caught them. I used my phone to record them, and I showed everyone they were liars. They weren't security, they were scammers. And now, it was time for them to pay. Right after I showed the animal control guy Officer Dan my video, things moved fast. He called for help on his radio, and in minutes, real cops showed up. Their car rolled down the street with lights flashing red and blue, spinning like a carnival ride. The noise was loud, wee-oh-oh, wee-oh-oh. It made Rusty bark, woof. Woof, from the porch. I held him close so he wouldn't run out. Bob and Larry's faces went white when they saw the police. They weren't grinning anymore. The cops jumped out of the car. There were two of them, big guys with shiny badges and dark blue uniforms, not cheap shirts like Bob and Larry's. One had a deep voice and said, "What's going on here?" Officer Dan pointed at Bob and Larry. "These two faked an HOA," he said. "Tricked me into coming. This kid's got proof." He nodded at me. I held up my phone. "It's all on video," I said. "They're liars." Bob and Larry didn't like that. They tried to bolt. Bob turned and ran toward the street, his boots stomping hard. Larry followed, waddling fast with his big belly bouncing. "Stop," one of the cops yelled. But they didn't get far. The street was short, and there was nowhere to hide. The cops were faster. One grabbed Bob by the arm yank, and pulled him back. The other caught Larry by his shirt. "Gotcha," he said. Larry tripped and fell on the grass, his beard full of dirt. Bob groaned, "Let me go." But the cops didn't listen. They put handcuffs on them. Click, click. The metal shone under the streetlights. "You're coming with us," the deep voice cop said. Bob's shoulders slumped. Larry's eyes got wet, like he might cry. "We didn't mean it," Larry whined. "We just wanted people to listen." The cop shook his head. "Yeah, well, you broke the law. Let's go." They pushed Bob and Larry into the back of the police car. I watched from my porch, holding Rusty. Their fake shirts looked silly now, all wrinkled and dirty. Officer Dan stayed with me while the cops drove off. He scratched Rusty behind the ears. Rusty wagged his tail and licked his hand. "This dog's no trouble," Officer Dan said with a grin. "Sorry I came here. Those guys fooled me." I smiled. "It's okay," I said. "You helped me stop them." He nodded. "You're a smart kid, Jake. Good job." Then he tipped his hat and walked to his truck. "Take care," he said, and drove away. I took Rusty inside and shut the door. My heart was still beating fast, but it was a good fast now. I sat on the couch, and Rusty jumped up next to me. He put his head in my lap, and I pet him. "We did it, boy," I said. "You're safe." He barked once, woof, like he understood. I gave him a big hug. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't scared. Bob and Larry were gone, caught by the real cops. They couldn't bother us anymore. The next morning, I woke up to sunshine. It was a bright day, with birds singing outside my window. Rusty was still asleep on his rug, snoring loud. I laughed and got up to make breakfast: eggs and toast, my usual. I dropped a little toast for Rusty, and he woke up fast, gobbling it up. "You're spoiled," I told him, scratching his floppy ear. He wagged his tail so hard it thumped the floor. Then my phone rang. Ring, ring. I picked it up. "Hello," I said. A lady's voice answered. "Hi, Jake Carter? This is the city office." I sat down, curious. "Yeah, that's me," I said. She sounded nice. We heard what happened last night, she said. Those two guys Bob and Larry, they're in big trouble. They've been fined, big time, for impersonation and harassment. I blinked. Fined? I said. Like, money? She laughed. Yep. A lot of money. They have to pay for lying and bothering people. And the police found out more. They did this before in another town. Fraud, they call it. They're not getting away with it. I grinned. That's awesome, I said. Thanks for telling me. She said, no problem. You helped us catch them. Good work. Then she hung up. I put the phone down and looked at Rusty. Hear that, boy? I said. They're paying for it? He barked, woof. Woof, like he was cheering. I laughed and gave him another piece of toast. He deserved it. After breakfast, something cool happened. Neighbors started coming by my house. First was Mrs. Jenkins, the old lady next door with white hair. She knocked on my door, tap, 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 and I opened it. She held a plate of cookies, chocolate chip ones. Jake, she said, smiling big. I heard what you did. You stood up to those creeps. I took the cookies. Thanks, Mrs. Jenkins, I said. I just wanted to keep Rusty safe. She patted my arm. You're a good boy. And Rusty's a sweetie. I'm glad you're here. Then she hugged me and left. Next came Tim, the big guy across the street. He walked over with his loud laugh. Ha! Jake, man, he said, shaking my hand hard. You got those jerks. Everyone's talking about it. I smiled. Really? I said. He nodded. Yep. We all hated them bossing us around. Thanks for stopping them. He high-fived me and walked back to his house, still laughing. Then the lady across the street came, the one who yelled at me about Rusty before. I was surprised. She didn't look mad this time. Hi, she said, holding a little plant in a pot. I'm Sue. I'm sorry I was mean about your dog. I didn't know those guys were fakes. She handed me the plant. This is for you. Thanks for getting rid of them. I took it. Thanks, Sue, I said. It's okay. She smiled small. Your dog's cute, she said, then left. Rusty barked at her, wagging his tail. I think he forgave her too. All day, people stopped by. Some brought food, cookies, a pie, even a bag of apples. Others just said thanks. You're a hero, Jake, one guy said. Maple Grove's better now, a lady told me. I didn't feel like a hero. I was just a guy with a dog. But it felt good to hear. Rusty got lots of pats and belly rubs. He loved it, rolling on the grass while people laughed. That week, I spoiled Rusty extra. I went to the store and bought him treats, big bones and little chewy sticks. He chewed them all day, making happy noises. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I got him a new toy too, a red ball that bounced high. We played in the yard, and he ran after it, barking loud. Woof. Woof. Nobody complained now. Bob and Larry were gone, and Rusty could be himself again. One afternoon, I sat on my porch with my lemonade. The sun was warm, and the air smelled like flowers. Rusty sat next to me, chewing his new bone. I looked out at Maple Grove, the little houses, the green lawns, the big oak tree in my yard. It felt different now. Not scary or weird anymore. It felt like home. Real home. I thought about Bob and Larry. They were in jail, probably, or at least paying those big fines. The city lady said they'd done this before, tricking people in another town, taking money, acting big. But they messed up here. They picked me to bully, and I fought back. I smiled to myself. They thought I was just a new guy with a loud dog. They didn't know I'd catch them. Mrs. Jenkins walked by and waved. Hi, Jake, she called. Hi. I said back. Tim drove past in his truck and honked. Beep, beep. Sue peeked out her window and nodded at me. Everyone was happier now. No more fake cops sneaking around, no more mean notes on doors. Just a quiet neighborhood with nice people and one scruffy dog. I leaned down and hugged Rusty. We did good, boy, I said. He licked my face, his wet tongue all over my cheek. I laughed. "You're the best," I told him. He barked, "Woof," and wagged his tail hard. Maple Grove was ours now. No more trouble. Just me and Rusty, safe and happy. The sun started setting, turning the sky orange and okay, so that's my story. My name's Jake Carter, and I'm just a regular guy who moved to Maple Grove with my scruffy dog, Rusty. He's got brown fur, one floppy ear, and a tail that wags like crazy. We had a wild time here. Two mean guys, Bob and Larry, tried to take him away. They pretended to be HOA security, whatever that was, and said Rusty barked too much. They scared me for weeks, sneaking around, leaving notes, even calling animal control. But I caught them. I used my phone, my clues, and my guts to show everyone they were liars. They got caught by the real cops, fined big time, and now they're gone. Rusty's safe, and Maple Grove feels like home. But here's the thing I learned: sometimes the loudest bullies are just hiding the weakest lies. Bob and Larry acted big and tough. They walked around like they owned everything, yelling at me, pointing fingers, grinning like they couldn't lose. Their voices were loud, their steps were heavy, and they made me feel small. But it was all fake. Their shirts were cheap, their car was beat up, and their HOA wasn't even real. Under all that noise, they were scared of getting found out. Their lies were weak, like a house made of straw. It only took one push to knock it down. And I was the one who pushed. I didn't start out wanting to be a hero. Nope, not me. I'm not tall or strong or super smart. I'm just Jake, a guy with messy hair and a dog I love more than anything. When Bob and Larry came after Rusty, I didn't think, oh, I'll be a big hero. I just thought, no way are they taking my buddy. Rusty's my best friend. He sits with me when I eat cereal, sleeps by my bed at night, and barks at squirrels like it's his job. I couldn't let him go. So I fought. Not with fists or yelling, but with watching, listening, and figuring things out. I protected him because that's what you do when you love someone. And guess what? When you stand up for what's right, you'd be surprised who stands with you. I thought I was alone at first. Bob and Larry scared me, and I didn't know if anyone would help. But then Mrs. Jenkins, the old lady next door, told me there was no HOA. Tim, the big guy across the street, said he didn't like those creeps either. Even Sue, the lady who used to yell about Rusty, came by with a plan to say sorry. After I stopped Bob and Larry, neighbors brought me cookies and pies and said, "Thanks, Jake." They stood with me because I stood up first. It's like when you're brave, other people get brave too. I think about that a lot now. Standing on my porch with Rusty, sipping lemonade, watching the sun go down. The sky turns orange and pink, and the air feels cool. Maple Grove is quiet again. No more fake cops, no more mean notes. Just kids on bikes, birds in the trees, and Rusty chewing his bone. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It's peaceful, and it feels good. I didn't know I could do something big like that. Catch liars, save my dog, make my neighborhood happy. But I did. And it makes me wonder, what else can I do? What else can any of us do? What about you? Ever had to fight for something or someone you love? Maybe it's not a dog like Rusty. Maybe it's your little brother when someone's mean to him at school. Or your best friend when they're sad and need a hug. Maybe it's your favorite toy that someone tried to take, or a spot on the playground you didn't want to lose. Fighting doesn't always mean hitting or yelling. Sometimes it's just saying, "No, that's not fair," or standing tall when you're scared. It's doing what's right, even when it's hard. I bet you've got a story like that. Something you care about so much you'd stand up for it, no matter what. Like me with Rusty. He's just a dog, sure, but he's my dog. When Bob and Larry came with their lies, I didn't back down. I watched them, wrote down clues, and told the truth loud enough for everyone to hear. And it worked. They're gone, and Rusty's here, wagging his tail like always. That's what happens when you fight for what you love. You win, even if it's messy. Let me tell you about the day after the cops took Bob and Larry. It was sunny, and I took Rusty outside to play. I threw his red ball, the new one I got him, and he ran after it, barking loud. Woof. Woof. Nobody cared now. No one glared or whispered. Mrs. Jenkins waved from her porch, her white hair shining in the sun. "Good boy, Rusty," she called. Tim drove by and honked his truck. Beep, beep. Even Sue peeked out her window and smiled. It was like the whole neighborhood woke up happy. I sat on the grass, watching Rusty roll around. He got dirt on his fur, and I laughed. "You're a mess," I said. He barked and licked my face. That's when I felt it. Maple Grove wasn't just a place anymore. It was my home. Not because of the house or the yard, but because I made it mine. I stood up to the bullies, and people saw me. They saw Rusty too, not as a loud dog, but as my buddy. That's what fighting for something does. It makes a place yours. Sometimes I think about Bob and Larry. Where are they now? Probably paying those big fines the city gave them. Maybe sitting in a jail somewhere, mad they got caught. They thought they could trick everyone, scare me, take Rusty. But they didn't know me. They didn't know I'd fight back. Bullies like that, they're loud because they're empty inside. Their lies fall apart when you shine a light on them. And I was the light this time. You can be a light too. Yeah, you. Whoever you are, reading this. You don't have to be big or loud or special. You just have to care. Care about something so much you won't let it go. Maybe it's your pet, like Rusty. Maybe it's your family or your friends. Maybe it's just being you, even when someone says you can't. When you stand up, people notice. They cheer for you, even if it's quiet, like a cookie from Mrs. Jenkins or a high five from Tim. I didn't plan to be brave. It just happened. One day, I was scared, hiding from Bob and Larry. The next, I was holding my phone, telling the truth. It wasn't easy. My hands shook, my voice wobbled, and I thought I'd lose. But I kept going. For Rusty. For me. And it worked. That's the secret. Keep going, even when you're scared. That's how you win. Now, when I look at Rusty, I feel proud. He's still the same goofy dog chasing his tail, barking at squirrels, howling at the moon. "Awoo. Awoo," he goes, and I laugh. He's not perfect, but he's mine. And he's safe because I didn't give up. That's what I want you to remember. You don't have to be a hero to start. You just have to love something enough to try. Then you're a hero anyway. So what's your story? Ever had to fight for something or someone you love? Maybe it's big, like stopping a bully. Maybe it's small, like sharing your lunch with a friend who forgot theirs. It all counts. Tell me about it. Write it in the comments below. I want to know. Did you feel scared? Did you win? Who stood with you? I bet you've got something awesome to say. Me and Rusty, we're good now. We sit on the porch every night, watching the stars come out. The sky gets dark, and the crickets chirp. Rusty chews his bone, and I sip my lemonade. Maple Grove is ours, and it's peaceful. Bob and Larry are just a memory, a silly one now. They lost because they picked the wrong guy to mess with. I stood up, and my neighbors stood with me. That's the power of doing what's right. You've got that power too. Inside you, right now. It's not about being loud or big, it's about being brave. So next time something's wrong, think of me and Rusty. Think of how we turned a scary thing into a win. You can do it too. Stand up, speak out, keep going. You'd be surprised how strong you are and who's right there with you when you do. Let me know in the comments. What do you love? What would you fight for? I'm listening. Me and Rusty both. Woof, he says. That's his way of saying you're awesome. And you are. Believe it. Inc. I sipped my lemonade and watched it. Rusty put his head on my lap, and I pet him slow. Bob and Larry were gone. Justice was served. They paid for their lies, and I got my peace back. It felt awesome. Really, really awesome.